Hi everyone in cloud computing, and welcome to episode 17 of the Cloud Computing Training Show with Brad Nelson and internationally recognised and world's #1 industry expert and thought leader, David Linthicum. This show is sponsored by Nelson Hilliard, cloud computing recruitment specialist, placing great people in cloud, IoT, fintech and AI. This week we're excited to have as our special guest Ron Batra. Ron is a business-focused technologist with extensive experience in transformative technologies and modern architectures. Hi Dave and Ron, a warm welcome to you both. It's exciting to have you on the training show this week.
It's great to be on again. Of course, it's great to have Ron on. I mean, he's really a thought leader in the whole IoT edge computing space, and he's really going to provide some great perspectives in terms of our training show today. How you doing, Ron?
I'm doing great, David. Thank you, and Brad, for having me over. I look forward to the show.
That's fantastic. It really is great to have you on the show. It's been we've done a couple of shows already this week, the C-suites and for Australia, and thoroughly enjoyed recording those. So I know we're all really looking forward to this training show. And this week we're going to be talking about edge computing. And do you guys think we have enough training resources to support the demand for edge computing?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and kick that off. I think that we don't. And so one of the things I see is this tremendous move into IoT. And IoT is a mix of disciplines, low power networks and data analytics and, networking and transmission and sensor processing and, in any number of ways in which we're collecting the data, drone-based systems, mobile sensor-based systems, things like that. Where the reality is that we're asking people to build things at the edge. And when you say that, they typically look at you like you're crazy. When the reality is we're trying to push the distributed computing model out to where we're acquiring the information, and there's probably 100 factorial ways of doing that, in terms of the complexity that's out there. So I don't really know where to tell them. I can tell them to go get AWS training, which is easy to do. You can get that online. I can tell them to go get general cloud computing training. You can go to lynda.com, other places to get that online. I can tell them to go get any computing training. But if you look through the catalogs within these training organizations, no one lists edge or even IoT-based systems. So, Ron, how do you solve this problem? How do you get us out of this crisis?
First of all, I agree with you, David, that there is a training gap, and it's partly because the edge is a moving target, which is still being defined by the industry. But having said that, there are some things which are very consistent, and the skills are not that hard to morph into. So the practitioners who are doing today's work and don't have edge training, I think the great news is that they don't have to make a huge jump from where they are today to becoming edge literate, as I call it. The great news is that the incremental training has to be picked up. I guess the only caveat is that it has to be picked up from a few places, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So the average, when you look at an IT developer or somebody who's doing, so what does an edge, when you look at an edge ecosystem, you have edge software. That's the likes of Amazon Greengrass and Microsoft IoT Hub. Software AG also has some edge products. Clearblade has some edge products. There's many companies which have edge software platforms. So first of all, the practitioners have to learn those platforms. People who did SOA and middleware like 5 years ago are the perfect people to morph into this, because the principles of event-driven architecture are very similar. So that's great news. But the point is you got to point your head in that direction. You got to understand how IoT pub sub is done in the cloud, how messages are consumed, how one message translates to another, and that kind of stuff. When you talk of the infrastructure area, networking, well, networking on the IoT is going to be a different play. As you said, David, low power networks, and then the form factors of the hardware infrastructure. Now, the issue is this, that those are systems that are moving targets. And so I think there are some practitioners for which the skills are easier to pick up. Developers are going to be, I believe, the best and the fastest to pick up IoT edge skills. The other parts of the infrastructure are not hard, but it's a matter of time before they mature a little bit. Cloud, people have been doing cloud for a few years now. People understand the cloud is the foundation and maybe the place where the data goes to rest. Starts from here, edge, and goes to rest at the cloud. It's the in-between, which is also not that hard. So does that make sense? Am I making sense in describing the edge ecosystem and the different layers that go through it?
Yeah, you're making sense to me. I guess we're trying to make sense to, a 20-something person who's trying to figure out, how to morph his or her career, toward understanding what this stuff is. And I think you provided a very good and truthful answer. And by ultimately doing that, it just becomes kind of confusing. I mean, I have the same thing. It's trying to explain cloud computing to people. It's it's clear in our minds as to what it is, but it's very difficult to articulate it. And if we're talking about edge computing, you can pretty much say yes to data storage and processing and microprocessing, low power networks, and all these various things that come into bear. And so should this be something that we're kind of breaking out, very much like we broke out cloud computing in different factions and different ways of using it in kinds of patterns, so people can figure out how to get trained up? And is it too much to encourage someone to become an edge computing expert, but become an edge network computing expert, edge data collection expert, edge system expert? Should we send them down specific paths?
I do believe there would be value of doing that. Fundamentally, the science of networking, for example, is not changing too much. Somebody who can do Ethernet networks and has done software-defined networks is a very valid candidate to learn edge networking, whether that's with a low-power network or if it's with a Wi-Fi network. So the answer to your question, David, is that I would not look at people who are starting from ground zero. The people who want to be edge literate are people who are already practitioners in a certain area but want to add that layer on top. So network architecture, yes, edge architecture, compute edge architecture. The people who have been doing SOA and middleware integration are going to be the best edge apps developers. So I would say that just add that layer on top versus starting from scratch is probably a much better way than trying to get everybody from grounds up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And I think, how do we get the training companies on board with this? I mean, you and I aren't going to train everybody on edge computing. There has to be courseware made and, going down specific areas and things like that. And right now, it has to be to write a course in computing. I would run the opposite direction. Even though I know a lot about it, I just wouldn't know how to address it in terms of breaking down the complexity in something that's understandable. I can with cloud computing because, it's kind of understood in terms of how the patterns are going, but not as much in edge computing. So would this be something that needs to be a thought leadership, needs to be more books written? And I wouldn't write a book about it either, because as soon as I got the book written, it would be changed. That's probably the more fastest moving technologies in the world right now. People who are producing videos, how can we make it easier for people to get trained up on edge computing? Because I think, by the way, if you get trained up on edge computing, you're a six-figure and beyond base, monetary compensation based on your capabilities. What do you think, Ron?
I do believe all of the above. I do believe if somebody were to write a book, the book would be obsolete before it began. So I think a good infusion of social media pointing to the right educational resources is the right way. So the companies that are doing groundbreaking work in edge computing, some of them do produce blogs and articles, and they have workshops, and they have hackathons. I think practitioners have to be proactive to go towards those. We can aggregate the content in some kind of a training material that, hey guys, this is my edge education wisdom for, say, fiscal week 22 of the year. The last 2 weeks, the following 5 new features were released by Amazon Greengrass. And the following 2 more advancements were done by, say, software or Microsoft IoT Hub made some advancements. So I think it's going to be a mix of many things: online training, blogs, as well as following some of the publications that the manufacturers of the software are releasing in the process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. But, I think, and probably this is a question for Brad, because I think he's, talking to people all the time that are trying to, up their technical games and trying to figure out what the next, generation of things are coming down the line. I guess, this and IoT, and even we could talk about blockchain, even though I think there's some good training that's out there on blockchain and certainly in cloud computing. So, Brad, if someone came to you and said, we're trying to get into edge computing, I'm basically figuring out a path to get a career around this, what would your advice be? Would you show them this you show them this show and look at the confused face of me and Ron and that would be the answer? I mean, is there any reference material, any place you would send them to?
That's a great question, and I think you guys have really hit the nail on the head with both of your comments. It's such a fast-moving part of that part of the cloud computing industry of joining the dots between IoT and data and just that transference. I think there are pools and resources out there, but it does move so quickly. And like you both said, writing the book would mean nothing really in bringing the skills up to speed. I think Edge is really is only as good as the IoT that's driving it, and the IoT is driving the Edge because of so many innovations within IoT that it makes everything else very difficult to keep up with it. I think, like Ron said, play to your strengths. So if you've got interests and you've already identified where you want to be and what you know, and we've spoken about this a number of different times on training shows, the fool is the person that doesn't play to his strengths. If you want to hit the ground running, you must already know what you're good at and what you want to do. If you can identify in the market where you want to go and you've done your due diligence, you've been online, you've found all the resources you need, you see where IoT is heading, then familiarize yourself with the platforms that are going to facilitate the performance of your outputs with regards to working in edge computing. And that is solely driven by IoT. So I think if someone's really keen on that, yes, they can watch our shows and they can look at all the different shiny objects. IoT isn't going away, as we spoke about in the C-Suite show and the Australia show. And edge computing complements that, because there's got to be that dot between the cloud and IoT, and edge computing facilitates that. And as you so rightly said, that's going to give you your six-figure salary, because the space is not occupied massively, because the training isn't there to occupy or to facilitate the people fulfilling that marketplace. They're the common sense and the most logical way that I can do it, and then specializing within that is something that's going to tick the boxes for the individual, really.
Yeah, and I think this is something where the autodidact, the people who are self-taught, are the people who kind of will run ahead. Ron's that way, and there's lots of other people out there that kind of pick things up very quickly and therefore become experts in technology, even as it emerges, and actually probably help and lead the emergence of the technology. But people who want to learn after the fact, the ability to kind of become very proactive, understanding where the resources are and where to go get the information, and kind of figure out how you can learn from that, and then getting involved with micro projects, small sprints, things you can do in a matter of days in terms of standing up edge computing based systems, and also begging to be on projects where they're dealing with edge computing is probably the advice that I give everybody. There's no one place you can go to get killer training that's going to provide you with everything you know about edge computing. This is something that's going to have to be a ongoing struggle. And the people out there that rise to the top are the ones who understand that and don't really demand that formal training occur every time they need to learn something. Just figure out how to go off and figure it out themselves. What do you think, Ron?
You hit the nail on the head, David. There has to be a high degree of proactiveness by the individual, a self-driven individual, to go out and seek the missing pieces, especially on a moving target and a technology that is advancing as fast. I think that is the biggest motivator one has. I think people who get good at it also should try and evangelize it more. So whether they go and speak at conferences or via channels like this or publish content, I think if people can, at this stage of edge computing, I think it's a big question mark in a lot of people's mind. I think what we can do as thought leaders is at least to point people what edge computing is, and tell them, like a mind map, guys, go here for this, go here for this, and go here for that. And then hope that we have pointed where the water is, go and drink from the well. Right?
I think that's great advice.
Thanks, guys. It's been a great show. Really enjoyed talking about IoT and edge computing, and hopefully this show will be of use to people that are trying to fill that gap or get into that space. And I think you're both right. It's definitely that proactive mindset and not the reliance on training that's going to really make the superstars within edge computing. Ron, thank you so much for being our special guest this week. It's been awesome having you on the shows.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, David.
David, thanks again for a great week of the training show. I nearly forgot what show I was talking about then.
Oh, it's great. Hey, we do too many of these, huh? It's great to be on the show as always, and thank you very much for Ron for showing up. You added a great deal of value this week.
Absolutely, Ron. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. It's been awesome.
My pleasure too. Thank you.
Well, thanks for watching, everyone. We really hope you enjoyed this week's training show. And if you have any questions, you can get hold of Ron on Twitter, which is at Ron Batra. David's on Twitter, which is at David Linthicum. And I'm on Twitter as well, which is at Nelson_Hilliard. Thanks again for watching. And remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any videos. Thanks very much.